One name on this list belongs to the only human being who has ever won both a World Rodeo Championship and an Academy Award, a feat nobody else has come close to matching in the 80 years since. Another man on this list wasn't given a choice about being first off the landing craft on one of the deadliest beaches of the Second World War. The army simply needed to know how deep the water was, and he happened to be the tallest man in the boat. A third spent 3 full years locked inside a federal penitentiary before he ever stood in front of a movie camera. These aren't stories about who looked convincing with a 6-shooter. These are the real lives that made their Western roles look easy by comparison. These are the 10 toughest Western stars in Hollywood history. Number 10. Chuck Connors. Long before Chuck Connors ever spun a rifle on camera, he was busy doing something almost no athlete in American history has ever managed. He played professional basketball for the Boston Celtics and professional baseball for both the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Chicago Cubs, one of only a small handful of men to ever compete in both the NBA and Major League Baseball. But one detail sets him apart even within that rare company. On November 5, 1946, before the Celtics had even played their first home game in franchise history, Connors shattered the backboard during warm-ups at Boston Arena. Glass came down onto the court, the game was delayed more than an hour, and Connors became the first player in professional basketball history to break one, before his team had even tipped off its inaugural season. Standing 6'5", Connors also served during World War II as a tank warfare instructor at Fort Campbell and West Point, training soldiers in combat techniques he never personally had to use overseas. He carried that same discipline directly into his most famous role, playing Lucas McCain on The Rifleman from 1958 to 1963, and performing every rifle spin himself after practicing the move thousands of times until it looked effortless. He went on to star opposite Gregory Peck in The Big Country, and later headlined the series Branded from 1965 to 1966. Connors died of lung cancer in 1992 at 71. Colleagues who worked alongside him on set often said his athletic background gave him a stillness other actors simply couldn't fake, the confidence of a man who had already spent years performing under real pressure with actual crowds watching. Number 9. Neville Brand. Neville Brand never auditioned his way into Hollywood. He fought his way there first. Born in Griswold, Iowa in 1920, he enlisted in the Army straight out of high school in 1939, shipping out with the 331st Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Infantry Division and seeing combat across the Ardennes, the Rhineland, and Central Europe. On March 1, 1945, in Germany, his unit came under devastating machine gun fire from a hunting lodge, and every man was pinned down with nowhere to move. What Brand did next earned him the Silver Star, the third highest decoration for valor in the entire United States military. Years later, he explained it with almost no embellishment, saying he must have flipped his lid and simply decided to go into that lodge alone, entering through the rear and clearing the enemy position single-handedly. A month afterward, on April 7, 1945, he was shot in the upper right arm along the Weser River and nearly bled out on the spot. He also received the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and the Combat Infantryman Badge, and some media reports at the time called him the 4th most decorated soldier of the entire war, a label Brand himself consistently pushed back against. After coming home, he appeared in a 1946 Army Signal Corps film alongside a young Charlton Heston before using the GI Bill to study acting seriously, eventually becoming one of Hollywood's most convincingly menacing character actors, starring in the Western series Laredo from 1965 to 1967, and appearing across dozens of Gunsmoke-era productions. But the war followed him home in ways that never fully let go. Brand developed severe combat-related stress that fed a long, brutal struggle with alcohol. And in a 1975 interview, he put it plainly, saying the drinking had become his medicine, and that the only way he could face a morning was reaching for a pint of whiskey just to work up the nerve to make a phone call. He was also, somewhat surprisingly, a voracious reader who had amassed a personal library of more than 30,000 books, one of the largest private collections in Hollywood, until a fire in 1978 destroyed his Malibu home and most of that collection along with it. He died of emphysema in 1992 at 71, a genuine wartime hero who spent the second half of his life quietly trying to outrun the first. Friends who visited him later in life said he rarely brought up his own war record unless someone else raised it first, treating the Silver Star less like a badge of honor and more like a weight he simply carried without much comment. Number 8. Rory Calhoun. Rory Calhoun's birth name was Francis Timothy McCown, and his early life reads less like a Hollywood biography and more like a crime file. Born in Los Angeles in 1922, his father, a professional gambler, died when Calhoun was only 9 months old, and he was raised by a stepfather who beat him regularly. At 13, he stole a revolver and was sent to a reform facility, the Preston School of Industry, which he escaped after robbing several jewelry stores. He went on to steal a car and drive it across state lines, and at 17, he was sentenced to 3 years in a federal penitentiary in Springfield, Missouri. Once that sentence ended, he was transferred to San Quentin on separate charges and remained there until he was paroled just before turning 21. By the time he was 20, Calhoun had already passed through a reformatory, a federal penitentiary, and San Quentin, a path most men never fully walk back from. He didn't just walk back from it. He worked afterward as a lumberjack, a miner, a cowhand, and a truck driver. And then in January 1944, while riding horseback in the Hollywood Hills, he was noticed by actor Alan Ladd, whose wife happened to work as a talent agent and arranged his very first screen test. Standing 6'4" with features that looked carved out of the desert, he was a natural fit for westerns, eventually appearing in more than 80 films, including River of No Return alongside Robert Mitchum and Marilyn Monroe, and the hit series The Texan from 1958 to 1960. In 1955, a tabloid magazine exposed his criminal record publicly, and rather than destroying his career, the revelation somehow deepened his outlaw appeal with audiences. Calhoun died in 1999 at 76, living proof that where a man starts out doesn't have to determine where he ends up. He reportedly spoke with genuine candor about his past whenever interviewers asked directly, never pretending the years in custody hadn't happened, which only seemed to make audiences trust him more rather than less. Number 7. Slim Pickens. Most people remember Slim Pickens as the man riding a falling bomb in Dr. Strangelove, or as the bumbling foreman stumbling through Blazing Saddles. What almost nobody realizes is that Lewis Burton Lindley Jr. spent nearly 2 decades doing one of the single most dangerous jobs inside a rodeo arena, working as a rodeo clown and bullfighter. That job means physically placing yourself between a 2,000-pound bucking bull and a fallen rider, using your own body as bait so the man on the ground has a chance to crawl to safety. Pickens did that work at the Calgary Stampede, Cheyenne Frontier Days, and the Pendleton Roundup, starting when he was barely a teenager, and the physical toll was enormous. 2 broken wrists, broken collarbones, hands, elbows, and ribs, a crushed chest, a broken back, twice, broken foot bones on 5 separate occasions. At one point, an X-ray of just one side of his body revealed 17 separate healed fractures. He got his stage name at 16, when he dropped out of school to ride rodeo, and his father swore he'd throw him out of the house if he ever saw his real name listed on an entry sheet. So the young Lindley asked the rodeo manager to list him under a fake one instead, and the manager looked him over and said the prize money would be slim pickings. He wrote it down exactly like that and won $400 that same afternoon. Hollywood discovered him in 1950, when director William Keighley spotted him working a rodeo and cast him in Rocky Mountain alongside Errol Flynn. From there, he appeared in One-Eyed Jacks with Marlon Brando, The Cowboys with John Wayne, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, and The Getaway with Steve McQueen, and he reportedly never once needed a stunt double, since there was no working stuntman alive who could ride better than he already could. Pickens died in 1983 at 64, following surgery for a brain tumor. Colleagues who worked stunt scenes alongside him for decades said watching Pickens ride was less like watching technique and more like watching a man simply return to the one physical skill he had already mastered before any of them had ever met him. Number 6. Dale Robertson. Dale Robertson never took a single acting lesson in his entire life, and everything he brought to a movie screen was genuinely earned rather than studied. Born in Harrah, Oklahoma in 1923, he grew up training horses and boxing competitively at Oklahoma Military Academy. When World War II broke out, he earned his officer's commission through Officer Candidate School and deployed to Europe with the 32nd Combat Engineer Battalion of the 97th Infantry Division, seeing some of the heaviest fighting of the entire European campaign. He was wounded twice in action and received both the Bronze Star and the Silver Star for gallantry, 2 of the highest decorations the American military can award. During one engagement, an explosion blew him out of a tank hatch and killed the rest of his crew instantly. He survived it and kept fighting. When the war ended, Robertson went straight back home to Oklahoma and his horses, and true to form among most genuinely tough men, he rarely offered details about what he had actually lived through overseas. He was discovered almost by accident when talent agents spotted a photograph his own mother had taken of him. Time magazine would later call him probably the finest horseman working in television. He starred as Jim Hardy in Tales of Wells Fargo from 1957 to 1962, riding his own horse Jubilee and performing his own stunts throughout. Followed by Iron Horse and Death Valley Days, he kept over 200 horses on his Oklahoma ranch until his death in 2013 at 89. People who visited that ranch later in his life said Robertson could still saddle and work a horse well into his 80s, treating retirement less as a finish line and more as a return to the exact life he had always preferred over the film sets that made him famous. If you're finding these stories as compelling as we did researching them, take a second to subscribe to Old Tapes. We uncover real stories like these every single week. Number 5. James Arness. January 22, 1944, Anzio Beach, Italy. Private James Arness of Minneapolis stood inside a landing craft with the 3rd Infantry Division, 4 months short of his 21st birthday, when the order came down. Because he stood 6'7", the Army decided he would be the first man off the boat, not out of bravery or volunteering, but because measuring the water depth was easiest through the tallest man available. He stepped into the Mediterranean with bullets tearing through the air overhead, and the water came up only to his waist. He waved the rest of the men forward behind him. 10 days later, on February 1, 1944, German machine gun fire tore through his right leg and shattered the bone completely. Doctors came close to amputating it. Penicillin ultimately saved the limb, but Arness spent more than a year moving through hospitals and multiple surgeries before receiving his honorable discharge. He was awarded the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Combat Infantryman Badge, and the man who would go on to become James Arness, having quietly dropped a letter from his original family name, carried that pain with him for the rest of his life. If you watched all 635 episodes of Gunsmoke between 1955 and 1975, you may have noticed that Matt Dillon's limp grew slightly more pronounced with each passing season. That wasn't a performance choice. That was Anzio quietly following him for 30 straight years. John Wayne personally recommended Arness for the role, and Arness went on to play Marshal Dillon for 20 years, on what remains the longest-running live-action primetime series in American television history. He died on June 3, 2011, at 88. Castmates who worked alongside him for 2 straight decades said he almost never discussed Anzio directly, letting the limp itself do whatever explaining needed to be done. Number 4. Jock Mahoney. Jock Mahoney was the kind of man that other genuinely tough men looked at and quietly reconsidered their own toughness. Born Jacques-Joseph O'Mahony in 1919, he was a champion swimmer and diver at the University of Iowa before enlisting in the United States Marines, where he became a fighter pilot and later a flight instructor. After the war, he walked onto Hollywood backlots and built a career that arguably made him the greatest stuntman in the entire history of the Western genre, doubling for John Wayne, Errol Flynn, Gregory Peck and Randolph Scott, absorbing the falls and the physical punishment so the credited stars never had to. His defining moment came during Adventures of Don Juan, where a jump from a dangerously high staircase was considered so risky that every other stuntman in Hollywood turned it down outright. Mahoney asked for $1,000 to do it, an almost unheard-of fee for a single stunt at the time, and the studio paid without a single objection because everyone involved understood nobody else would even attempt it. He eventually stepped fully in front of the camera as the star of The Range Rider from 1951 to 1953, performing every stunt in the show himself, and followed that with Yancey Derringer from 1958 to 1959. While filming Tarzan's 3 challenges on location in Thailand, Mahoney contracted dysentery, dengue fever, and pneumonia simultaneously, losing nearly 50 pounds in the process, but refused to halt production, finishing the film through sheer stubbornness while his body was actively breaking down around him. In 1973, he survived a serious stroke and returned to work anyway. He died in 1989 at 70. Stunt coordinators who trained under him for years afterward described his approach to physical risk as almost clinical, a man who calculated exactly how much punishment his body could absorb, and then, more often than not, absorbed slightly more than that anyway. Number 3. Jack Palance. Jack Palance was born Volodymyr Palaniuk on February 18, 1919, in a Pennsylvania coal mining town, and his father, an anthracite miner, would eventually die of black lung disease. As a teenager, Palance himself went down into those same mines and worked alongside men who coughed up coal dust and treated every single day above ground as a small victory. He escaped through his fists. He won a football scholarship to the University of North Carolina, dropped out, and became a professional boxer competing under the name Jack Brazzo, compiling a reported record of 15 straight wins, 12 of them by knockout, before losing a decision to future heavyweight contender Joe Baxi on December 17, 1940. He later said, with characteristic bluntness, that a man had to be out of his mind to let his head get beaten in for $200. Then came the war. Palance enlisted in the Army Air Forces and trained as a bomber pilot, and in 1943, his B-24 caught fire and went down near Tucson, Arizona, after an engine failed on takeoff. He suffered severe burns and head injuries requiring extensive reconstructive surgery, spending nearly 2 years moving through military hospitals, and that surgery produced the gaunt, angular look that later became his defining screen trademark. He enrolled at Stanford on the GI Bill before eventually making his way to Broadway, where he understudied Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire, and eventually took over the role of Stanley Kowalski outright. Richard Widmark once said Palance was the only actor he had ever been genuinely, physically afraid of on a set. His breakthrough film role came as the hired gunfighter in Shane in 1953, earning him an Academy Award nomination and cementing him as one of Hollywood's most convincingly frightening screen villains for the next several decades. In 1991, at 73 years old, Palance finally won his own Academy Award for City Slickers, celebrating on live television by dropping to the stage floor and performing one-armed push-ups in front of a stunned audience. He died on November 10, 2006 at 87. Number 2. Dan Blocker. Everybody loved Hoss Cartwright. Across 14 seasons of Bonanza, Dan Blocker played the big, warm-hearted son of the Ponderosa, with a gentleness that made him the most beloved figure on the entire show. What almost nobody watching realized at the time is that the real Dan Blocker was every bit as tough as the frontier he portrayed on screen. He was born on December 10, 1928, in DeKalb, Texas, reportedly weighing 14 pounds at birth, and he grew into a man standing 6'4" and over 300 pounds, with a shoe size of 14.5. While attending college in Texas, he worked rodeo events on weekends and as a bar bouncer on weeknights, eventually earning a master's degree and working as a high school English teacher long before Hollywood ever knew his name. Then the Korean War changed everything. Drafted in 1950, Blocker was assigned to Company F, 2nd Battalion, 179th Infantry Regiment, part of the legendary 45th Infantry Division known as the Thunderbirds. He landed at Incheon and was already on the front lines by Christmas Day 1951. For the following 209 days, he saw nearly continuous combat along the Jamestown Line in what is now North Korea, with his unit fighting through Porkchop Hill, Old Baldy, and Hill 223, names Korean War veterans still associate with some of the bloodiest ground of the entire conflict. During one engagement, Blocker was shot while attempting to pull a fellow soldier to safety, and he refused evacuation, staying on the line until his regiment was finally ordered to the rear. He received the Purple Heart, the Combat Infantryman Badge, and the Korean Service Medal, with 2 bronze campaign stars. In 1959, he was cast as Hoss Cartwright, and for 14 years he brought a genuine tenderness to the role that audiences adored, most of them never knowing the man behind that smile had spent 209 days fighting on frozen Korean hillsides. On May 13, 1972, Dan Blocker died from a pulmonary embolism following what should have been routine gallbladder surgery. He was only 43. Bonanza's producers wrote his character's death directly into the show, and the series was canceled the following season. A gentle giant with a genuine warrior's record, gone far too soon. Number 1. Ben Johnson. His name was Ben Johnson, and he remains the only person in recorded history to have won both a World Rodeo Championship and an Academy Award, a combination nobody else has ever managed to duplicate. Francis Benjamin Johnson Jr. was born on June 13, 1918 in Foraker, Oklahoma, on the Osage Indian Reservation. His father was a 3-time world champion rodeo cowboy, and young Ben grew up on the Chapman Barnard Ranch learning to rope and ride before he had even properly learned to read. There was no acting school in his plans, no agent, no dream of Hollywood whatsoever. Johnson came to California in 1940 for one simple reason: delivering a carload of horses for Howard Hughes's film The Outlaw, fully intending to drop off the animals and head straight home. Instead, during the filming of Fort Apache in 1948, a team of horses bolted, and a runaway wagon threatened to kill 3 members of the crew. Johnson leapt onto the wagon and brought the team back under control on the spot, and director John Ford, who happened to be watching, rewarded him immediately with a 7-year contract. Over the following 5 decades, Johnson appeared in more than 300 films, riding alongside John Wayne in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon and Rio Grande, Alan Ladd in Shane, William Holden in The Wild Bunch, and Steve McQueen in The Getaway. But in 1953, at the height of his film career, Johnson did something that revealed exactly where his heart actually belonged. He walked away from Hollywood entirely to compete on the professional rodeo circuit, winning the Rodeo Cowboys Association's Team Roping World Championship. He came home broke, later joking that all he had left was a worn-out car and an angry wife. But he had the one thing he actually wanted more than anything else: a world championship buckle. Then in 1971, director Peter Bogdanovich offered him the role of Sam the Lion in The Last Picture Show. Johnson turned it down flat, since the script contained profanity, and Ben Johnson simply did not curse, not on camera and not in his real life either. John Ford personally called to ask him to reconsider, and Johnson agreed on one strict condition: that he would personally rewrite every single line to remove the cursing himself. For that performance, he won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 1972, and when he reached the podium, he offered exactly 6 words: "This could not have happened to a nicer fella." To this day, he remains the only person to have won both a World Rodeo Championship and an Academy Award. Despite building an estimated fortune of $100 million through real estate over his lifetime, he never changed who he was, staying married for 53 years and running charity rodeos for children across the country. Whenever anyone asked what he was proudest of, his answer never varied: winning a Rodeo World Championship. Prouder of that than of anything else he had ever accomplished. Ben Johnson died on April 8, 1996, at 77. From a two-sport athlete who shattered a backboard before his own team's season even began, to a war hero who cleared an enemy position alone, to a gentle giant who carried 209 days of combat quietly behind a warm smile, to a ranch kid who rode into Hollywood with a truckload of horses and rode back out with a world championship buckle and an Academy Award, these were the 10 toughest Western stars Hollywood ever produced. Their real lives were never staged on a sound lot. They were lived first, and Hollywood simply borrowed the story afterward. So here's what I want to know from you. Out of everyone on this list, whose real-life story surprised you the most? And do you think a Hollywood built entirely around men like this could ever exist again today? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.